To welcome us all sa ating 23rd Kapihang OH, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the Quezon City Chapter, our very own Dr. Catherine Artais Carriaga.
Maraming salamat, Dr. Margo. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat na aming tagapanood at tagapagsubaybay sa aming kapamilya sa Philippine College of Occupational Medicine, mga kapuso sa Occupational Safety and Health, at kapatid sa propesyon ng kalusugan. Isang mainit na pagtanggap mula po sa amin dito sa PCOM Quezon City Chapter. Narito kami muli upang maghatid sa inyo ng mga bago at nagbabagang kaalaman mula sa aming regular na virtual na kapihan. Disyembre na, kay bilis ng panahon, malapit na ang Pasko. Ngunit ang banta ng COVID-19 ay nandyan pa rin. Patuloy pa din tayong nakikibaka sa panganib na dulot ng pandemyang ito. Lahat ng sektor ng lipunan ay patuloy na nakikipagtulungan upang matugunan ang pangangailangan ng bawat mamamayan. Maraming panuntunan ang pinatutupad ng iba't ibang ahensya sa kalusugan man o sa kagawaran ng paggawa para sa lahat, lalo na sa ating mga mahal na manggagawang Pilipino. Sa pagtatapos ng taong 2020, may umusbong na liwanag, dulot ng paglabas ng posibleng lunas na maari magtapos sa pandaigdigang problema dulot ng pandemya. Ito na ba ang regalo ng pag-asa ngayong Paskuhan? Kaya po ngayong gabi, kami ay lubos na nalulugod dahil kasama po natin ang isa na namang eksperto sa ating ika-23 Kapihang OH online edition para talakayin ang usaping bakuna kontra COVID-19, updates on COVID-19 vaccine. Magandang gabi sa inyong lahat.
Maraming salamat, Dr. Carriaga. Bago po natin ipakilala ang ating resource person ngayong gabi, nais po namin malaman ang bumubuo ng ating mga audience, saang napapabilang sektor ng ekonomiya sa pamamagitan po ng pagsagot ng ating online poll na makikita sa ating screen. Yes, meron po tayo dyan na makikita po na sa screen natin, no, na online poll. Yes, pakisagutan lang po. What industry sector does your company belong? You can click it. Then, how many employees are in the company? You have 1 minute to answer po, please. Maraming salamat po. Mamaya tatalakayin po natin ang kasagutan ng ating poll survey. All right. To introduce our guest tonight, ladies and gentlemen, our CME chair, Dr. Okay, to introduce our speaker for tonight, ladies and gentlemen, our CME Chair, Dr. Maria Cecilia Dayana.
Maraming salamat, Dr. Margo. Magandang gabi po. Our speaker for tonight is a highly trained, multi-awarded infectious disease specialist with a Master of Science and Diploma in Clinical Tropical Medicine from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, University of London, UK. He is a certified both by the Royal College of Physicians of London, UK, and the Philippine Board of Internal Medicine and the Philippine Board of Microbiology and Infectious Diseases. He had his Master of Science in Bioethics from the University of the Philippines, Manila, College of Medicine, and his PhD in Medicine from the Hontendo University Graduate School of Medicine, Tokyo, Japan. He is a Fellow of the Philippine College of Physicians, Fellow of the Philippine Society of Microbiology and Infectious Diseases, Fellow of the American College of Physicians, and Honorary Fellow of the Royal College of Physicians of Thailand. He is currently a professor at the University of the Philippines College of Medicine. He is chair of the Health Sciences Division and secretary of the National Academy of Science and Technology. He is the executive director of the Philippine Council for Health Research and Development of the Department of Science and Technology. He is also the president of the Philippine Association for the Advancement of Science and Technology, and is a member of the Board of Advisors of the ASEAN Committee on Science, Technology, and Innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, my dear colleagues, I now give you Dr. Jaime C. Montoya.
Good day to all. Thank you to the Philippine College of Occupational Medicine, Quezon City Chapter, for inviting me as a resource speaker to this session dubbed as 23rd Kapihang OH or online edition, Usaping Bakuna Kontra COVID-19. Today, I will be presenting the recent updates on COVID-19 vaccines development. I will divide my presentation to 4 parts, namely, 1, the introduction, as it is important to become aware of the different government agencies or task groups that are actively taking action in improving access to the said clinical trials and COVID-19 vaccines. Second, I'll be tackling about the access to local clinical trials. Specifically, I'll be answering the following questions. What are the upcoming local clinical trials? What are the arrangements being undertaken by these government agencies to make the process of the conduct of clinical trials here in the Philippines responsive to the pandemic? Third, are the updates regarding access to COVID-19 vaccines, wherein I will be talking about the options the government is considering to finance and secure COVID-19 vaccines for Filipinos. And last but not the least, is patient access or participation. How can people participate in the clinical trials? I will start by giving a brief explanation and updates on the COVID-19 efforts being made by the DOST and other government agencies to get access to the COVID-19 vaccines, not only for the clinical trials, but also for procurement and supply. In March of 2020, the DOST reached out to some of its bilateral partners for potential collaboration on vaccine development. On May 22, 2020, the sub-TWG and vaccine development was created through IATF Resolution number 39 and was tasked to oversee and coordinate matters pertaining to COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials. With the recent appointment of Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr. as the vaccine czar, a revision in the COVID-19 vaccine cluster organizational structure was proposed to streamline the role of various TWGs and government agencies. Under a cluster, there are specific task groups, shortened as TG, with specific functions vital in ensuring the Philippine access to successful COVID-19 vaccines. The IATF sub-TWG on vaccine development has been subsumed to the TG on vaccine evaluation and selection, which will now include the DOST's vaccine expert panel. The specific functions of the new TG on vaccine evaluation and selection are the following. Provide oversight on the evaluation of applications and conduct of COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials in the country. evaluate results of COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials as part of the inputs on the criteria for COVID-19 vaccine selection, develop criteria and provide recommendations for the evaluation and selection of COVID-19 vaccines that will be considered for procurement, and continue engagement with bilateral partners for clinical trials interested in pursuing local manufacturing and technology transfer. While the VEP's technical inputs and evaluation of the vaccines would form part of the consideration on which COVID-19 vaccines government will procure, the final regulatory review and approval for implementation of a clinical trial will still be upon the Food and Drug Administration. The former sub-PWG and vaccine development through the DOST has formulated the vaccine development roadmap as our strategy for immediate success for successful COVID-19 vaccines and our vision of vaccine self-sufficiency in the future. The roadmap constitutes a short-term, medium-term, and long-term plan. The short-term plan considers the Philippines has a limited capacity right now for independently developing and manufacturing vaccines against SARS-CoV-2. However, the sub-TWG anticipates that COVID-19 may not be the only pandemic that the Philippines will probably experience. Thus, it is important to build the capacity of the country and the institutions on vaccine development to ensure a steady supply when the needs arise. As a medium-term plan to address the said need, it is proposed to establish a fill and finish facility wherein the bulk antigen will be imported to the Philippines from a foreign vaccine developer and have them filled into vials, which will then be packed and distributed locally. There are two options to accomplish this objective, namely through private sector-led modular multi-product fill and finish facility or the RITM Vaccine Self-Reliance Project. For the long-term plan, numerous factors must be considered, such as research and development, capacity building, and the market for the locally produced vaccines. For research and development, the reinstitution of the DOST Pharma Center and the establishment of the Virology Science and Technology Institute of the Philippines, or VIP, will serve as a platform to support the pharmaceutical development and research and development for human and animal vaccines. There are also recommendations currently being discussed for other disease pathogens to be included in the scope of the VIP. The VIP in New Clark City has been proposed for inclusion in the Build, Build, Build program by the infrastructure cluster. With the construction of the facility and compliance to the WHO pre-qualification process, the Philippines will be able to start producing human and animal vaccines that will be procured by the Department of Health for the National Immunization Program. Aside from the DOH procurement of the vaccines, the product that will be produced by the facility will also become available to the market where the private pharmaceutical companies can purchase. With each kind of vaccine having its own advantages and disadvantages, the Vaccine Expert Panel, the Single Joint Research Ethics Board, or SJREB, and the Food and Drug Administration are working together in evaluating candidate vaccines of pharmaceutical and biotech companies that are interested to conduct clinical trials in the Philippines. In order to facilitate these applications, the sub-TWG through the FDA has developed a 40-day process flow for the application for clinical trials in the Philippines. This will allow the VEP, SJREB, and the FDA to fast-track the evaluation of candidate vaccines without cutting corners for safety. This expedited process also contributes to the improved access by virtue of clinical trials. The second part of my presentation is on the updates of the local clinical trials. I will specifically be tackling bilateral partner engagements, independent arrangements, and the WHO Solidarity Trial. I will first touch on the short-term strategy to get access to clinical trials or COVID-19 vaccines through bilateral arrangements. In order to provide you an overview of the current status of our work to ensure the Philippine access to successful COVID-19 vaccines, here's a map that shows our bilateral and multilateral collaboration. So far, we have been in contact with 19 biotech and pharmaceutical companies in 7 countries, namely Sinopharm, Sinovac, Anhui Zhifei, Guangzhou Institute of Biomedicine and Health, and Tianyuan Biopharma, all from China. Adimune Corporation, Academia Sinica, and the National Health Research Institute, and the Changgung University, and Medigen Vaccine Biologics, all from Chinese Taipei. Gamaleya and Vector of Russia, Texas Children's Hospital, Arcturus Therapeutics, and Inovio Pharmaceuticals in the USA, and University of Queensland and Seqirus, and Vaccine of Australia, Anges Takaro Bio of Japan, the University of Saskatchewan in Canada, and Bharat Biotech of India. As well, the Philippines is also participating in the World Health Organization Solidarity Vaccine Trials and the COVAX facility of the Gavi, CEPI, and WHO. Among these partners, we have signed 9 confidentiality data agreements or CDAs. This will allow our vaccine expert panel to review their phase 1 and 2 clinical trial results, which is relevant to ensure the safety of the possible implementation of their clinical trials here in the Philippines. 1 from Sweden, AstraZeneca. 4 of these came from China, Sinovac, Sinopharm, Tianyuan, and Anhui Zhifei. 1 from Russia, Gamaleya. 1 from Australia, University of Queensland, CSL and Seqirus, and 2 from Chinese Taipei, Adimune Corporation and Academia Sinica. It is important to highlight that before the approval of any independent clinical trial, our bilateral partners must first submit their complete documents required by the Vaccine Expert Panel and the Food and Drug Administration. To date, there are 5 applications submitted to the sub-TWG on vaccine development, which have been processed by the Vaccine Expert Panel and the Ethics Committee. The final approval will come from the FDA, and these said applications are from Gamaleya from Russia, Sinovac from China, Clover Biopharmaceuticals from China, and AstraZeneca from Sweden, and Janssen from the USA. As mentioned earlier, the sub-TWG on vaccine development is the gatekeeper for COVID-19 vaccine clinical trial applications. Hence, we also deal with applications from non-bilateral partners. Currently, there are 2 applications for independent trials. The Clover Biopharmaceuticals, a company from Australia and China, applying for phase 2 and 3 trials, and the Janssen Vaccine and Prevention from the USA, which is currently applying for a phase 3 clinical trial in the country. Now we are going to talk about the WHO Solidarity Trials. The participation of the Philippines in the WHO Solidarity Vaccine Trial is the second short-term strategy in ensuring access to COVID-19 vaccines. The WHO will facilitate the said clinical trials or study with the primary goal of evaluating promptly, efficiently, and reliably the safety and efficacy of candidate vaccines. The Philippine participation has been approved by the Interagency Task Force on Emerging Infectious Diseases through its resolution number 47. The Solidarity Vaccine Trial is a global action led by WHO to to evaluate candidate vaccines as quickly as possible by identifying vaccine candidates and their progress, to define the desired characteristics of safe and effective vaccines to combat the pandemic, and to coordinate the clinical trials across the world, giving the best chance of safe and effective vaccines for all. By participating in this project, the Philippines will contribute to the global effort of vaccine development to address the COVID-19 pandemic. To date, the final clinical trial protocol, list of participating vaccines, and standard operating procedures are yet to be released by the WHO. Based on updates, the WHO is finalizing the candidate vaccines that will be included in the study, and they also expected to release the official list soon. While the protocol is yet to be released, preparatory activities are continuously being done by the Philippine WHO Solidarity Vaccine Trials team. Discussions on the informed consent process for the trials and strategies in responding for the participants who would show side effects and possible side effects through the participation in the study are also being done. The third part of my presentation is on the access to COVID-19 vaccines. I will be discussing about the financing mechanisms and the procurement or supply arrangements being done by the government. Vaccinating the Filipino population would require a substantial budget. Thus, the government has been closely working with the Asian Development Bank or ADB and the World Bank as one of the financing options. I will now discuss the mechanism in securing access to vaccine supply or procurement. An important mechanism the Philippines participating in is the COVAX facility, which is a multilateral initiative coordinated by Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations or CEPI, and the World Health Organization. It is one of the pillars of the WHO Access to COVID-19 Tools or ACT Accelerator, focused on accelerating the development, manufacture, and equitable distribution of appropriate, safe, and efficacious vaccines for every country around the world. Under COVAX, the three organizations work together to fund development and manufacturing activities, finance the procurement, and deploy COVID-19 vaccines in a fair and equitable manner. Through the facility, countries will be able to receive a maximum of 20% of the total vaccine doses requirements of the country, 3% of which will initially be deployed to countries as soon as vaccines become available. The remaining 17% will be made available subsequently. The Department of Health already sent an expression of interest to participate in the COVAX facility. This followed IATF resolution number issued last 23rd of July 2020, approving the participation of the Philippines to the COVAX facility, as well as the corresponding allocation of funds. In addition, the Philippines, being a lower middle income country, was identified as one of the eligible countries to avail of the COVAX Advanced Market Commitment or AMC. This makes the Philippines eligible for the following: financial support for vaccine procurement and access through the COVAX AMC, and their latest agreement was that vaccines procured through the COVAX facility would only cost $1.6 to $2 per dose, and also support for procurement mechanisms through UNICEF. Considering the Philippines will not be able to get all the COVID-19 vaccines it needs from the COVAX facility, the government is also making other arrangements in parallel. These include bilateral government-to-government negotiations, various tripartite negotiations, and multilateral engagements such as with ASEAN. The last part of my presentation will be on patient access or participation in clinical trials. It is important to touch on this as we expect clinical trials to start anytime soon. First, I would like to emphasize that participation will be on a voluntary basis. Before a volunteer is given an investigational vaccine, an informed consent will be given. The volunteer will be briefed regarding the protocol, the risks and benefits of joining the trials, and their rights as a volunteer to ensure that they fully understand and agree to the implications of being part of the screening process and conduct of the trials. All potential recipients of vaccines under the clinical trials will first be screened for certain inclusion and exclusion criteria. These criteria may include physical examination, general state of health, and ability to follow instructions, among others. Laboratory tests will also be performed, such as baseline RT-PCR for SARS-CoV-2 viral RNA, IgM and IgG tests, clinical chemistry examinations to detect abnormalities or disease conditions that may not be detected on physical examination alone. While clinical trials are important, the choice to participate in one is very personal and depends on your unique situation. Clinical trials are voluntary, and to join or exit a trial is a very important medical choice and decision. I hope I was able to give an overview of the current situation on our vaccine efforts in order to ensure that we have equitable access to safe, effective, and affordable vaccines. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you today. Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat at mabuhay ang PCOM.
Okay. May I request, hello, Dr. Montoya, are you already here? Doctor?
Yes, I'm already here. Good
Hi,
evening
good
po.
evening. Maraming salamat. Napakaganda ng inyong lecture, no, Doc?
Yeah,
Kung
pero napansin ko
sakali lang,
yata parang malabo ang dating sa iba. So baka
I know.
lilinawin ko na lang kung hindi naging malinaw yung ibang mga nakita sa slide. Pasensya na po.
Alright. Maraming salamat po, no? May konting lagging lang po dahil napakarami po natin ngayong gabi. We are 300, almost
Opo,
340.
napakarami pala. Congratulations po to PCOM,
Maraming salamat
Quezon City
po.
Chapter.
Okay, are you ready for the open forum, Doc?
Yes po.
Okay, magtanong na po ako. Una po sa mga lahat, no, very controversial ito na meron na tayong bakuna para sa COVID-19. Ano po ba ang ating expected na side effects of the vaccine? Ayan, unahan ko na po, hot seat agad.
First of all, we have to understand na depende po yan sa technology platform. As of now, there are 4 different technology platforms that are being developed for COVID-19. The first one are the inactivated viral vaccines. Ibig sabihin po, these are composed of the whole virus na inactivate lang or pinatay so as to stimulate the immune response. So that's the first group. And the best example of this are the ones coming from China. So Sinovac, Sinopharm, these are all inactivated viral vaccines. The second class are what we call the viral vector vaccines. Ibig sabihin, meron pong non-pathogenic virus na nagke-carry ng information that will actually stimulate the human host to produce the proteins that will stimulate an antibody response. So ito po yung tinatawag na viral vector vaccines. Dito po kasama ang AstraZeneca, ang Gamaleya, that's the Russian vaccine, kasama po dyan. Then we have the what we call the mRNA or messenger RNA vaccine. So ito po yung they carry the genetic information so that it integrates, it actually asks our body to produce the protein that will stimulate the antibody response. Dito po kasama ang Pfizer, BioNTech, at saka ang Moderna, no? At Well, ito po yung mga nangungunang vaccine platform. There are other vaccine platforms. We have the recombinant protein vaccines din po, which are also being used. And they have their own respective side effects.
Okay.
Pero based on what we know, doon sa nakapag-release na po ng interim analysis ng phase 3 clinical trials, and I have 3 in the list that is publicly available. We have the Pfizer-BioNTech, which is an mRNA vaccine, Moderna, which is an mRNA vaccine, and AstraZeneca, which is a viral vector vaccine. All of them have reported only minor side effects. So the most common side effects, of course, are pain in the injection site. So parang masakit a day or so after injection. Merong mga reports na namaga pero nawala naman. At saka yung fatigue, yung parang feeling na pagod kayo after mabigyan ng vaccine. But they were able to recover. So there were no major side effects reported. Of course, we are not saying now these are the only side effects. We are only saying that based on the safety data that is available, because you of course understand that based on the earliest date that the clinical trials were done, which is around May or June, we only have a few months follow-up of the patients, and these so far have been seen. So makikita po natin yan kapag na-vaccinate na ang mas maraming tao over a longer period of time. So in terms of number, we may see more, more occurrences of some side effects, or in the long term, maybe we can see side effects that were not seen during the acute phase. So yun po ang nalalaman natin sa ngayon.
Alright. Maraming salamat po sa pagsagot. So, how many doses of the vaccine shall be given, Doc? And would it be for free or may costing po ito?
Generally speaking, most of the vaccines are going to be given at least 2 doses. 2 beses po, at least 21 or 28 days apart. Meron po mga exceptions po ito. Meron mga vaccines din na once lang po ibibigay. But what we don't know as of now is how often would you give it? Will it be given every year, every 2 years, every 3 years? Hindi pa po natin alam because we have to see whether the antibodies will persist long enough to confer protective immunity to the recipient. So sa ngayon pa lang alam natin is yung number of initial doses, but we don't know how frequently it will be given. That will come out as we have more people being vaccinated and as we follow up the antibody levels of those people who will be given vaccines. Costing, it depends on how we will get them. So ang costing po, may negotiations na ginagawa ang ating government with the different companies and also through the COVAX facility, which I mentioned a while ago. In the COVAX facility, it includes some of the leading vaccine developers, and this is organized by the WHO with the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines. At this facility, we qualify to get for free po, 20% of our national demand. So when I say 20%, that's 20% of the population. If we have a population of 100 million or 105 million, just to round off, that means we have a guaranteed 20 million people to be vaccinated if we are going to accept the terms of the COVAX facility. Since we are classified as a low middle income country, the government will not pay anything to get access to this vaccine. However, orders above 20% of our demand, for example, we want to vaccinate 70% of the population, which is the directive of the president, then we have to pay for the remaining 50%, and that price will be also negotiated. But the government has allotted money to to vaccinate all of the target populations, particularly the poor. And there is a prioritization program that has been set up na po kung sino yung pa-prioritize. So that is already being finalized by the Department of Health because sila po ang in charge dyan sa kung sino po ang unang makakatanggap ng bakuna na ipamamahagi ng ating pamahalaan.
Okay, maraming salamat po. Doc, aside from the allergy na na-mention niyo po, no? Is there other life-threatening adverse effects reported yet? And as you've mentioned sa iyong lecture, may mga volunteer na rin po ba tayo?
Well, doon sa life-threatening, sabi ko nga, I'm not saying na walang life-threatening, but based on the available data we have, at doon sa mga published data na nirelease ng mga leading vaccine developers, wala pong life-threatening side effect. The most po itong mga allergies nga no na report nila, pati po yung fatigue, muscle weakness, muscle pain, pain in the injection site, fever, yan po ang mga common na nakikita pero wala pong life-threatening side effect so far. In answer to your question, kung may participants na,
Yes.
well, wala pa hong clinical trial na nagsisimula sa Philippines.
Okay.
So all of the trial applications are still being evaluated. But we hope, kasi may dalawa na pong company na approve na po ng Vaccine Expert Panel and our Ethics Review Board and has now been formally submitted to the FDA, who will render the final approval if they're going to conduct clinical trials in the country. So dalawa po yan. It's actually Sinovac and Clover Biopharmaceuticals. Sila po yung nasa FDA na po and it's already being reviewed. The others are still being reviewed by the Vaccine Expert Panel. Okay.
If I may ask, in connection to that, can you comment on the news article about the AstraZeneca recently withdrew from the development of the anti-COVID-19? So, ano kayang masasabi niyo po doon, Doc?
Well, ang pag-withdraw ng AstraZeneca has nothing to do with dahil hindi maganda o may side effect or what. It is more of a strategy for AstraZeneca. They based on their interim analysis of their data generated by the phase 3 clinical trials in the US, in the UK, and in Brazil, they found it already good enough to support their emergency use authorization application with the Medical and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency of the UK, which is actually parang FDA equivalent natin sa Philippines, and the EMEA, European Medical Agency. So they've already applied for emergency use authorization and they felt that they don't need to expand their clinical trials. So they are withdrawing their application in the Philippines.
All right. Thank you for answering that question. Now, in light of that, there are talks that the strain seen in US is different from the strain we have here in the Philippines. Do this vaccine cover both strains? Let's say I travel here, going to US, magkaiba na po ba yun? Do I need to get a vaccine there as well?
Well, what I know based on the, because there's an international database wherein all of the SARS coronavirus 2 strains from different countries are being submitted. What we know so far is that there is no major difference among the circulating strains in different countries. There are reports that some of these viral strains carry a mutation that makes it more infectious, yung D614G mutation. Pero this is actually is not a big change on the genetic structure of the virus, and we think that the vaccines will still work any part of the world. If it's proven to be effective, then it's supposed to be effective worldwide. But I think what is important to remember is that not so much the strain of the virus, but the genetic makeup of the host. So we don't know whether there will be genetic differences, meaning Filipinos will respond differently compared to Caucasians or to Africans or to Europeans. We don't know. That is why we encourage the conduct of clinical trials in the Philippines, so we will know and have some information on how Filipinos respond to these different vaccines.
All right, thank you, Doc. So, speaking of target population and priority people na mabibigyan po itong vaccine, is there a coverage na age group or age limit na mabibigyan po ng bakuna?
Again, generally speaking, the vaccines have been tried between the ages of 18 to 59. So it's really the adult age group. There are specific vaccines that are now being tried for the elderly, so above 60, and for those less than 18. So those are still ongoing. But generally speaking, these vaccines will be given between the ages of 18 to 59, unless the product has a specific study to show that it works in the other age groups. Now, in terms of prioritization, the WHO has made a recommendation on who should be prioritized, but that will, of course, be dependent also on the country decision. So from the WHO, I think it's consistently being mentioned that healthcare workers or the frontliners, so mga doktor, mga nurse, mga nagtatrabaho sa ospital, will be a priority. So that is consistent. Yung mga iba pong kategorya, that will depend on the priorities that will be finalized by governments. So for example, there is a proposal that the second priority will be the elderly or senior citizens, no? And then people with comorbidities or other diseases that make them vulnerable to COVID-19 or its complications. So those are still being discussed. And ang sinasabi ko lang, yung consistent lang na pinaprioritize are really the healthcare workers, the essential workers.
All right, thank you so much. In line of this, does the government, is there any discussion about the government allowing a separate procurement of vaccines from companies for their employees? Will the government handle administration or will they hand it over to the private company as well?
Okay, I think that question was based on an agreement that was signed. It's a tripartite agreement between government, the private sector, and AstraZeneca, I think a few weeks ago. But anyway, in that particular agreement, the private sector is actually contributing to the purchase of vaccines through Astra if it is approved by the FDA. So, of course, that is based on the condition that it will be approved by the FDA. How it's going to be deployed, hindi po ako privy to that information, but my understanding is that a certain percentage of the vaccines that will be bought through that agreement, which is about, I think it's about more than 2 million doses, will be given to the private sector. Meaning these are for people who are working in the companies that have actually made the donation.
Oh, I see. Thank you so much. So, Doc, last question na ako bago tayo mag-ano po, no? With regards to the, what do you call that? Yung sa vaccine po natin, meron pong isa pang question dito. Would there be an idea for price range of the vaccine? Kailan po kaya ang rollout nito sa atin? Would it be open to market anytime soon? As this mandatory, isa pa yun.
Okay. Well, yung question na yan, when it's going to be rolled out, when it's going to be available, will be dependent on two factors. The first one is it has to be approved by the FDA. That's one. Because without the FDA approval in the Philippines, it cannot be made available in the Philippines. And number two, of course, once it is approved by the FDA, the supply should be available, meaning the vaccine should be available.
Mhm.
Now, regarding the second factor, I'll deal with the first factor, no? But the second factor, the supply. Assuming that the vaccine is already approved, it will be dependent on pre-order arrangements made by the Philippine government. Maybe you would be familiar with public announcements by Secretary Galvez, the vaccine
Mhm.
SAR. Ang sigurado tayo makakakuha at the earliest, so far, based on the negotiations that are currently going on, is
Mhm.
July of next year.
July of next
However,
year.
negotiations are still ongoing to some other companies that are willing to make the vaccine available as early as the second quarter of next year. So meron pang ongoing po yon. So hindi pa natin sigurado kung talagang July ba o baka meron na rin maging available ng second quarter of next year. Now, regarding the FDA approval, siguro naman alam nyo na ang Pfizer BioNTech vaccine was already given an EUA by the United Kingdom
Mhm.
and Canada. So that means it can already apply for EUA in the Philippines.
Mm.
And for your information, by virtue of executive order signed by the President, our FDA can now issue also an emergency use authorization for vaccines that have already been approved for EUA in other countries. So we anticipate that Pfizer BioNTech will be applying for an EUA in the Philippines very soon. The other vaccines are also awaiting the decision of the FDA regarding their application. For example, Moderna, I was informed, submitted their EUA application already yesterday to the US FDA. Pfizer BioNTech has been given a favorable recommendation by the advisory committee to the FDA, which means that most likely the FDA will issue them an EUA. I say most likely because usually they follow the recommendation of the advisory committee, but it's not a guarantee.
Mhm.
And AstraZeneca has also applied for an EUA, as I said, in the European Medical Agency, EMEA, and also the FDA of the UK.
Okay. FDA.
So kung ganun po, mabilis yan. If they're able to submit their application to the FDA, maybe after at the most a month, the FDA will be able to issue an EUA as well, which means it can be made available in the market. So according to the FDA, if they are able to submit their application by January, they will be issuing the EUA maybe March of next year. So magiging available na yan dapat.
Okay. Sa as you've said, yung mga application lang po pala ito, no, na basis kung gaano kabilis ang rolling out ng mga vaccine, no, Doc? Pero if I may, I'll ask a certain question here na medyo controversial kasi, Doc. How is it that it's possible daw na naka-create na ng vaccine na ganito kaiksi na oras, but normally it takes years for a manufacturer to develop one? This is in light of the other vaccine that happened last year, no, yung sa ating dengue vaccine, where side effects were experienced by those who were given the vaccine, even after undergoing the normal process of trials. So what can you say about this, Doc?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. But let us first look at the landscape. It is not entirely new, because if you are familiar with the characteristic of the SARS coronavirus 2, it is very similar, not completely the same, but very similar to SARS coronavirus, which appeared in 2003. Now, in 2003, vaccines were already being developed against SARS coronavirus. However, they discontinued the development because the SARS-CoV disappeared. The cases actually disappeared. So hindi na nakita na kailangan mag-develop ng vaccine against SARS-CoV. Itong SARS coronavirus 2, because of its similarity to the SARS coronavirus 1, kaya nga tinawag siyang SARS din dahil magkamukha sila. the same technology was also used. Kaya mabilis ang development. So the technology is not really new. Matagal na siyang dinedevelop. In-interrupt lang because there was no need. But now may need. So they're able to activate it. And number two, naging publicly available na kasi ang whole genomic sequence ng SARS coronavirus 2 made available by China and some other countries the moment they were able to complete the sequencing. And that helped to a significant extent the development of vaccines against SARS coronavirus 2. So yun ang medyo mga differences dyan. That's why we have parang ganong kabilis na development for SARS coronavirus 2 vaccine.
Alright. So last question, Doc. Yung mga naka-encounter na po or nagkasakit na rin ng COVID-19, pati po ba sila babakunahan pa rin or meron na po bang ganong study or ano po?
That is a good question. What I can say for now is that based on what we know, sabi ko nga, I always say based on what we know, because we have limited information about the SARS coronavirus 2. Based on what we know, if you recover from a natural infection, the antibodies you produce, if you recover, are actually much better and more persistent than antibodies derived from vaccination. So in theory, pwede na silang hindi bigyan ng bakuna. However, there are studies ongoing now to see how long the antibodies last for those who actually recover from a natural infection. That will be a basis for us to know whether they don't need a booster or maybe they need a booster. We don't know. But that will be depending on the studies that are still ongoing.
All right. Dr. Montoya, maraming salamat po sa pagpapaunlak sa aming mga katanungan. Pero Doc, bago po tayo magpapatuloy, saan po ba namin kayo pwedeng sulatan, email sa mga karagdagan pa po naming mga tanong, Doc? Where can we reach you?
Well, I can put in the chat box my email address, so you can actually email me. And of course, you can also course it through the PCHRD. Sa PCHRD, we have Instagram, we have Facebook, we have Viber, we have all of the social media accounts, meron po kami. And you can course it also through our social media accounts. PCHRD po.
Maraming salamat, Doc. Now, to formally end tonight's educational activity, ladies and gentlemen, our chapter vice president, Dr. Jeremiah.
Hello.
Dr. Jeremiah Martin Florante.
Thank you, Dr. Montoya.
Thank you po.
Thank you very much, Dr. Margo Ku. Robert Lowell once said that the light at the end of the tunnel is just the light of an oncoming train, meaning you are going the wrong way. However, this time around, I should say that he is wrong, as I see hope and not a train. Sa mga kapwa kong advocate sa kaligtasan at kalusugan sa paggawa, this pandemic has been a challenge to all of us. This global public health crisis has proven not only a health issue, but also an economic concern. But Executive Director Jaime Montoya of the Department of Science and Technology, Philippine Council for Health Research and Development, provided us promising updates on the availability of vaccines against the dreaded coronavirus disease 2019 or COVID-19. As such, it is with profound gratitude to Executive Director Montoya for sharing to us his precious time and discussing this very important update to all of us. Again, thank you very much, sir. I would like to acknowledge the national officers and members of the board headed by Dr. Phil Pangilinan, to the Quezon City chapter's officers and members of the board, and to the rest of the membership of the Philippine College of Occupational Medicine for your presence and support on our regular Kapihang. Thank you as well to all our participants, our partners who are with us tonight. You are our success. You are our mouthpiece as well. Saying that, we hope that whatever you have learned tonight will be shared to your colleagues at work. To the technical support team of this virtual Kapihang OH, a big thank you and congratulations. This is another success, and you are the foundation to this success. For the information of everyone, tonight is also the premiere night of our 22nd Kapihang OH entitled Understanding DOH Department Memorandum Number 2020-0439 in our official YouTube page. This is on the discussion of the Omnibus Interim Guidelines on the prevention, detection, isolation, treatment, and reintegration strategies for COVID-19 by no less than the DOH Undersecretary Maria Rosario Vergere. After this Kapihan, do not forget to like, share, subscribe, and click the notification bell of our official YouTube page to view any updates and our past Kapihan sessions. Before I finally close tonight's Kapihan, I would like to remind everybody to like and follow also Quezon City Chapter's official Facebook page and Twitter and Instagram accounts. By following our social media accounts, you will always be updated. Please email us as well at pcomquezoncitychapter@gmail.com for your other concerns and requests relative to tonight's discussion. Always remember that with Quezon City Chapter, we value your safety and health. Hashtag PCOM QCC cares. Mabuhay at panatilihing ligtas at malusog tayong lahat. Good evening.
Muli, maraming salamat po sa inyong mga pagdalo. Salamat po, Dr. Montoya, sa pagpaunlak niyo po sa amin. Marami po kaming natutunan ngayong gabi. Sa susunod po na 24th Kapihang OH, ako po si Dr. Margo Venuscu na parating nagpapaalala na sa Quezon City Chapter, ang inyong kaligtasan at kalusugan ay mahalaga. Hashtag PCOM QCC cares. Good night, everyone, and stay safe and healthy.